What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan, and I am joined today by Michael Augello and Jim Parsons of the Hockey News. And a reminder that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now you can get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, we've got lots to talk about today. Of course, the biggest news of the week happened actually at the end of last week. The Minnesota Wild made a huge blockbuster trade on Friday to acquire Quinn Hughes from the Vancouver Canucks. But that said, I think it's pretty clear now that between that and signing Kirill Kaprizov long-term, the Wild have gone all in on the group that they have, and they are really pushing for Stanley Cup contention. So that being said, Mike, I'll ask you first. Do you think that Bill Guerin is going to continue to go big game hunting to acquire up until the trade deadline? And if so, what names kind of stand out to you as pieces that could actually be impact players for this team?
Well, if he's going big game hunting, I'd like to know what he's going to go big game hunting with, because he's already traded a good young center in Marco Rossi, a former first-round pick, and I think a very good young player in Zeev Buium. Ogren was a first-round pick, and he's had a couple cups of coffee in the NHL and is 2026 first. So if he's going to go after other big game, like a Nazem Kadri, whose name has been out there, he's probably going to have to give up, Daniel Yurov or another first-round pick. And I don't know how much you want to empty the cupboard. I mean, the one criticism I had about this deal is I would not have made it unless I got some sort of guarantee from Quinn Hughes' agent that I could sign him to an 8-year extension. If this is for 2 years, for this playoff and next playoff, you're in a division with Colorado and Dallas. I don't know how you can make you're a very good team. There's no doubt they have a couple good goaltenders. They have Brock Faber on the blue line. They have Kaprizov. But that's a tough road to hoe just to get to the Western Conference Final. And if you don't get more of a commitment out of Hughes, I was a little hesitant about that trade.
Jim, what do you think the Wild will do? Where do they go from here? Do you think that they can afford to be fully committed to the group they have right now, or are they going to try to add to it?
I think Michael makes a good point, but I actually look at this trade for Minnesota's perspective for like a 2-year trade. So this year, for me, it's about the Minnesota Wild contending, being in the conversation with Dallas and Colorado, and showing Quinn Hughes that this is a team to be excited about. And when you saw Quinn Hughes after that first win, and he's like, I think he said something like this team stacked or something to that effect after the game. I think that's all he's really looking at this season. Do I think Bill Guerin will probably go in on something else at the trade deadline this year? Yeah, I do. Michael makes a good point. What you're going to do that with and what assets you're going to be able to move at this point to add something significant, whether it's Kadri, Tage Thompson, Sidney Crosby in a dream scenario, right? But I think you also have to look at this perspective from next year. And this year and next year is going to be the 2 years that Quinn Hughes has to decide what he wants to do. July 1st is a key date for him because that's when he's eligible to sign an extension. But Minnesota contending for a Stanley Cup, I don't know that it necessarily begins this season. I think they'll use the summer and they'll use other options to really make a push next season, so that when Quinn Hughes is kind of deciding what he wants to do, he knows this is a team with Kirill Kaprizov and other assets that they are in this conversation, and they're going to be in this conversation for a long time. So I think Guerin is the kind of GM who's aggressive. I don't know that he was terribly worried about whether or not he could do anything else this season. I think he'll try, but I think it's more about next year and whether or not the Minnesota Wild become a team that you have to talk about, this year, next year, and maybe the year after that.
Well, the Minnesota Wild, of course, not the only team that was interested in trading for Quinn Hughes when he did end up getting moved from Vancouver. Actually, Elliot Friedman shared on 32 Thoughts earlier this week that both the New Jersey Devils, not surprising given that the other two Hughes brothers play for them, and then the Detroit Red Wings were actually both involved in trade talks with Vancouver involving Hughes up until, pretty close to the end there, but then obviously ended up coming up short. Minnesota won that trade. So, Mike, how do you think both of those teams should pivot, New Jersey and Detroit, throughout the rest of the season in order to bolster their rosters?
Well, it's ironic. I think it was ESPN's Kevin Weeks that reported that they were trying to clear salary to make a deal for Hughes. They were trying to move out Dougie Hamilton or Andre Palat to clear the cap space, and that they weren't able to do that. And plus, we don't know what the package would have been going to Vancouver, so all that machinations may have been a hindrance for New Jersey getting him. Plus, if you're going to get him in 2 years, do you really want to empty out the coffers of your franchise to get him now when you would rather get him in a couple years and pay nothing for him? We know that Detroit was interested. I've heard stuff about Philadelphia. There was some stuff about Buffalo being interested. Bowen Byram is a Vancouver native. There was talk about him going to Vancouver over the summer. So there was a lot of stuff, a lot of teams in this mix. And I just think that New Jersey, in terms of pivoting, well, we heard the name of Stamkos. We heard the name of Ryan O'Reilly. I would not doubt Nazem Kadri. I think Kadri and Sheldon Keefe did cross paths in Toronto. If not, he was a coach of the Marlies when Kadri was with the Leafs. There are enough impact players out there. With Detroit, you need an impact player like a Hughes, and I just don't think there's that player in this market. So I think Detroit is probably on the outside looking in when it comes to the playoffs.
Yeah, kind of a long way to fall, I think, when you're looking at whatever your plan B is going to be after losing out on a guy like Quinn Hughes. Jim, do you see the Devils or the Red Wings, really adding another impact player before the deadline this year? Or are they going to probably make some smaller moves?
Well, I think the Devils have some damage control to do. I listened to that Quinn Hughes press conference, and when he said the Minnesota sacked up to make the trade for him, I read that as a kind of a shot to New Jersey, to be honest with you. I thought that was kind of a comment where he was subtly going, yeah, everybody knew that New Jersey was in this. Yeah, I would have loved to play with my brothers, but New Jersey didn't make the deal. And so when you're in that situation, and we know that the deal wasn't made because of the cap, right? There were two players that had trade control and chose not to use that and kind of invoke their trade clauses to make sure that they couldn't clear the salary cap space. So in New Jersey, I think there's going to be a lot that Tom Fitzgerald has to do to make sure that the New Jersey Devil fans, one, can live with the fact that they didn't get Quinn Hughes, and two, will make another improvement at some point this season. And what you're facing with or dealing with now is having to add a player who isn't so expensive, who won't make you cripple your cap situation or force those guys to ask or, invoke their trade clauses, right? So I think New Jersey's got some damage control to do here. As for Detroit, you never really know what's going on with Yzerman and the Yzer plan. It's one of those things where they're probably in a lot of stuff, but whether or not they're fully committed to making those deals, I thought Detroit had the pieces to do that trade. But, when push came to shove, I don't know how deep they were in conversations on that one.
Well, Jim, it was all about what these teams were willing to trade to Vancouver. The report is from Elliot Friedman. They were asking for Simon Edvinsson from Detroit, and Detroit did not want to move him. With New Jersey, and there was a lot of speculation out there. They were asking for Nico Hischier. And if I was Tom Fitzgerald, I would tell Jim Rutherford to fly a kite, because I'm not giving up Nico Hischier, because Jack Hughes, as great as he is, can't stay healthy, and then you have no number one center and no number two center. So, I adding Quinn Hughes to Hischier and Hughes and the rest of that team is effective. If you have to strip everything to get him, then I think you hurt yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's the criticism in Minnesota, if there is one, right? Like, they went all in to get Quinn Hughes, but they depleted the roster pretty good. They're already a little light at center, and they moved Marco Rossi, and then they traded who could be a Quinn Hughes light player in 2 years in Zibuim. So they went all in. They weren't afraid to do this, and I don't know that the other teams were in that same situation.
All right. Well, certainly something that we're going to be talking about quite a bit here, I'm sure, for the next couple years, because who knows where Quinn Hughes will be in a couple years from now. This whole saga, I think, is far from over. For now, however, going to switch gears a little bit. Got some unfortunate updates out of Chicago. Of course, Connor Bedard suffered a upper body injury in the final second of the Blackhawks game against the St. Louis Blues over the weekend. Head coach Jeff Blashill announced on Monday that he's considered week to week and that he won't be reevaluated until January. So with Bedard now being on IR, obviously that's a blow to the Chicago Blackhawks in the immediate term. But Mike, do you think this is going to impact his chances on making Team Canada for the Olympics?
It could. I mean, again, Kevin Weeks reported today that it was a separated shoulder. Those usually take 4 to 6 weeks to heal. I mean, there's, Bo Horvat also got hurt recently. I haven't heard a prognosis on him, but if Canada had Bedard on their roster, they could select him when the deadline is December 31st. And then if he is unable to play, then they can replace him. So I think that's a possibility. There's just so many young kids that Canada can bring. I mean, Celebrini seems to be a no-brainer right now. Bedard has played fantastic this year, and I think if he was healthy, I think his chances would be better. But now I think this sort of puts a spanner in the works for him making Team Canada.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Jim, I believe that they could still add Bedard to the roster and then replace him if there's, if the injury persists. But what do you think is the most likely outcome here?
Yeah, there's always wiggle room when you submit your initial roster on New Year's Eve, which is what the Team Canada plans to do. You have some time to make sure that other injuries, and maybe not just Bedard, knock on wood, everybody else stays healthy, right? But you have to have that wiggle room to be able to put somebody else in if something unfortunate happens. But I do wonder if Bedard, who was probably already kind of a bubble guy, I thought he was playing fantastic and he was probably trending towards making this team. You got to do wonder, though, if like 4 or 5, 6 weeks is enough time for them to go, you know what, maybe this isn't the right choice. There's some other options on this Team Canada that they could go with and be pretty happy with, right? So I think if Bedard comes back and he's healthy and he explodes for offense right out of the gate, then why not, right? But at the same time, there's going to be a lot of other players making up ground while Bedard is sitting out. So they're going to make a case for themselves to be in consideration for this team. And whether or not, Bedard is the guy that they want anyway, you can't ignore some of that play from other people who are candidates and also bubble players. So I think Bedard's got a decent shot of still making it. And I don't know that the injury takes him out of this, completely. But you got to look at these other guys who are on the bubble too, and how they play over the next 4 to 5 weeks is going to be a key for that.
Well, certainly, I think the fact that a perfectly healthy Connor Bedard was already a bubble guy really speaks to the depth of this forward group in particular for Team Canada. So it'll be interesting to see there. All right, Mike, we got to get to the big one here. The big one that we have been speculating about, I think, for months, if not years at this point. The Sabres have finally fired Kevyn Adams. They fired their GM on Monday. He was replaced by Jarmo Kekalainen. No surprise there. Former GM of the Blue Jackets. Of course, he was hired by Adams in June in a senior advisor role. So Adams was GM in Buffalo for 6 seasons. He obviously failed to reach the playoffs in all 6 of those seasons. Team is in jeopardy currently of extending their playoff drought to 15 seasons. So I've got to ask you, Mike, I mean, what was the thought process of doing this now? I mean, why was this the right timing? I mean, what do you think was kind of the final straw for Kevyn Adams in Buffalo? And do you think that Kekalainen, who was already in the organization for a few months, was the right replacement? Do you think that that's maybe why he was hired to be the sort of heir apparent when they did make this change? Or do you think they should have looked elsewhere?
Well, they've been playing the funeral dirge for Kevyn Adams for probably the last 3 months. Once the team got off to an 0-3 start and then lost 8 of 9, pretty much the die was cast. But was it the right timing? The right timing was 2 years ago. After they missed the playoffs by a point, and then they took a dramatic step back by bringing back basically the same team except for adding a couple veteran defensemen, and they took a big step back. That should have been it. He was pretty much, he made a few good moves, like trading Casey Middlestat for Bowen Byram or Ryan McLeod for Matthew Savoy. But a lot of his other moves were just inexplicable. And, and I think we're sort of symptomatic of a general manager who did not have a lot of experience and an organization that really did not put a lot of their force around, going out and getting players. They drafted and developed, but then the young players really didn't come through, and they've consistently failed. Now, Kekalainen, according to Terry Pegula, I was at the press conference this morning. They did a search. They had outside counsel. They had upper management people evaluate. They chose Kekalainen as the senior advisor. He came in. He's basically been helping Adams, but doing his own evaluation. And today he came out and said, well, nothing's guaranteed. We're going to evaluate everyone. He didn't guarantee Lindy Ruff a spot. He didn't guarantee the scouts or the management or anybody else. He says, we're going to evaluate as is and see where things go, which could mean a change in coach. It could mean some trades. He was asked about Alex Tuck and some of the other players. He was wanting to infuse this team with character. And he says there's enough talent here, but there's not enough character. That strikes me as a general manager who wants to hit the ground running and make changes. And according to Pegula and Kekalainen, he has full autonomy to do that. So, yeah, I mean, he was the only guy. They brought him in. It was either him or they were keeping Adams. So, it's going to be a very interesting few months in Buffalo.
Jim, what do you make of all this for sort of from an outside perspective? I mean, is the timing seem odd to you, or do you think this is the right timing for the move? And what do you expect from Kekalainen in Buffalo going forward?
Well, isn't this like the most Buffalo thing ever? Like to change out a GM and then keep the guy that was already there that you sort of knew and nobody's really excited about. I mean, I don't know how Michael feels about Kekalainen, but in Columbus, his history is not that exciting as a general manager, right? So you've got a team that traditionally makes moves, but nobody really knows exactly what they're doing. Are they rebuilding? Are they trying to stay competitive? It doesn't seem to work. They don't make splash. So when Michael says Kekalainen is looking for character and he's looking to make changes and hit the ground running, that might be the most exciting news out of this whole thing, if that's accurate, because that would mean that he's potentially looking at making a couple moves and long overdue trades to finally, ship out some of these top guys like Alex Tuck and then start again and get going in Buffalo would be probably, from an outsider perspective, the thing that Buffalo has needed to do for a very long time and has sort of toyed with it, but not really done it. So it's kind of like a Buffalo Sabres type of thing. As for the timing, I'm not really sure behind the scenes there. Michael would know more than I do how this has been in the works, or if this has been in the works for a long time, and whether or not it was just a losing record that sort of triggered all of this. But to have somebody come in like Kekalainen a while ago, everybody knew that he was the man in waiting. It was just a matter of time before Adams was relieved of his duties and Kekalainen sort of took over. They talk about whether or not they did a search and how many people they looked at, but did anybody really think they were going to go with anybody other than Kekalainen? I can't imagine that was something they were truly considering. Somebody would have to knock their socks off, I guess. But it is interesting because I don't necessarily know what he's going to do with this roster, even though it seems like he needs to make some drastic changes.
There was talk of them bringing in a veteran like Rick Dudley, who had been a GM in the NHL before and has been an advisor with Florida, lives in the Buffalo area. But that would have, I don't know if Dudley, as much respect as I have for him as a veteran hockey man, I don't know if he would have been at the part of his career that he would be willing to step into a GM's role. Kekalainen, he represents a departure for the Sabres. He is the first general manager with previous GM experience to be hired by the Sabres since Scotty Bowman in 1979. They have hired assistant GMs and guys who they plugged in, and that's been pretty much a disaster. It's been on the job training for Jason Botterill, Tim Murray, and Kevyn Adams the last decade. So that's a pleasant departure for the Sabres. Will it mean anything? Well, Scotty Bowman's general manager record in Buffalo was terrible. He won everywhere else. He didn't win in Buffalo. So I don't know if experience means anything. We will see.
We will see indeed. Elsewhere in New York, in the state of New York, Chris Kreider and Jacob Trouba made their return to Madison Square Garden for the first time as members of the Anaheim Ducks. Of course, they got video tributes, standing ovations in front of the Rangers crowd. Both Trouba and Kreider were both big leadership pieces for the Rangers. Trouba, of course, was their captain. Both traded to Anaheim rather unceremoniously last season. I think that I saw a video of I think it was Kreider didn't know how to get onto the ice from the visitor side at MSG. So definitely, some mixed emotions there. But Mike, how do you think Kreider and Trouba have fit in Anaheim so far, especially knowing the way that things ended for them in New York?
I think they fit in very well with that young team. They've provided some veteran leadership. I mean, Kreider has 13 goals right now. Everybody knows that he had back issues for the last couple of years in New York, and that has sort of affected his play. Those seem to be rectified right now. So he's scoring at a pretty good pace and providing secondary offense for the young stars like Leo Carlsson and Cutter Gauthier. Jacob Trouba is a veteran. He is a hard-hitting guy. Ask some of the players who he's racked up this year. They sort of needed that veteran presence. They have a lot of good young defensemen like Zellweger and a few others, but they needed that veteran presence to go along with Radko Gudas. And I think that those two additions have been a big plus for the Ducks. And actually, their subtractions have been a big minus for the New York Rangers. I think Chris Drury made a big miscalculation when he decided to sort of move on from the veterans because of what they were making or whatever. But that team is nowhere close to being as good without them as they were with them.
Yeah, I think obviously the Rangers are a team that have certainly taken a step back, and when really they were looking to do the opposite after last year was such a disappointment for them, having won the President's Trophy the year before. And now, obviously, as you said, it appears that Drury has made a big miscalculation with letting these guys go. Jim, do you agree with the void that these two guys have left in New York, and then how well they're fitting in with Anaheim?
Yeah, for the Rangers, it certainly looks like this was, a miscalculation. I don't know that they valued Trouba as much as they should have, and that exit out of that organization was ugly, to say the least. So it's nice to see that he's going to Anaheim. He's fitting in there well, playing over 22 minutes a game. He's offering what he was offering the Rangers in an Anaheim situation where you have to love their season so far, right? They are maybe the surprise of the NHL this year and are much more competitive than anybody thought they would be this soon. Kreider is a nice story as well. I don't know how ugly his exit was compared to Trouba's, but people sort of knew that was coming, and there were other veterans in New York that they were talking about jettisoning, and Kreider was among those people. So for those two to wind up together again on the same team in Anaheim, where that mix of veteran and young players is really working with a new head coach, and everybody seems to be clicking pretty well there, I think that's a real plus for Anaheim. But I do think it speaks more negatively of the Rangers and how they've been building their roster or deconstructing their roster and what it is they're doing. Because we're talking about teams where we don't really know what their direction looks like. I have no idea what the Rangers are thinking.
Yeah, that seems to be a common theme, I think, with the Rangers, and probably one that we will be discussing here for months, if not years to come. In the meantime, though, Jim, I do want to stick with you since we have you here today. Of course, last week, the Oilers and the Penguins made a goalie swap. Obviously, Oilers sended Stuart Skinner. They were sending Stuart Skinner to the Penguins, and the Penguins sent Tristan Jarry back to the Oilers. Two goalies that were sort of maybe considered trade pieces, but they have a long and maybe varied history in terms of their reliability in big moments, I think. So both goaltenders, interesting to see them traded for each other. And now, tonight, they will have a chance to face off against one another, against their former teams. So Jarry has already played one game for Edmonton. He made 25 saves, gave up 3 goals in the Oilers' win over the Maple Leafs on Saturday. Stuart Skinner getting his first start for the Penguins tonight against his former team. So, Jim, what were your first impressions of Jarry with Edmonton? Do you think that long-term he will end up being an upgrade over Skinner, or do you think it's still a little too early to tell?
Well, as far as the game goes, I thought he played solid. I don't think he played stellar, but I thought he played solid. big pressure. 33 hours after the trade, he was already in Toronto playing on a Hockey Night in Canada game against the Maple Leafs, which is like the center of hockey attention. So it was a good game for him in those situations, and considering the circumstances. I would have loved if the Oilers hadn't allowed that last goal, which was kind of a dud at the very end of the game, which I think they should have tried a little harder to make sure that didn't go in. But I thought Jarry was okay. The trade is interesting because originally, from our conversations with Stan Bowman and Stuart Skinner, I don't think they wanted to trade Stuart Skinner. I think they felt as though Stuart Skinner wasn't probably the guy. He wasn't going to be the starter moving forward in Edmonton and going into the playoffs. I don't think they wanted him as their 1A. But I don't think they were opposed to keeping him as a 1B. I think that we were looking for a tandem, and Jarry was the guy that they had been doing their homework on, watching for a while, seeing if that was an option. And I think the plan was to have those two in tandem, and they just couldn't make the money work. Pittsburgh didn't want to retain salary. They couldn't do that trade and move Pickard and another piece to get what they needed. So they ended up moving Skinner because I think they believed that Jarry was their guy on a cost control contract over the next couple of seasons, right? So whether or not he's an upgrade over Skinner, we're going to find out. These are two goalies with two very different, storylines moving forward. For Skinner, he's got to prove that 2 consecutive Stanley Cup final losses do not define his career, and that he can turn around and play very well. I don't even know if he stays in Pittsburgh, to be honest with you. By the trade deadline, he's a pending UFA. He could be moved. If Pittsburgh, they've got like 4 goalies, right? So what they do there, I don't know. But he's got to prove that he can do more than, be the disappointing, inconsistent guy that failed in the final. And for Jarry, he needs to just be the guy to show Edmonton that moving forward, they've got a goaltender that they can rely on, that it was the right choice to make to go with him over the next couple of years, because he is in lockstep with Connor McDavid now. Those two players, their contracts expire at the exact same time. Their window to win in Edmonton is the same. And so if this doesn't work, it's going to be a major disaster for GM Stan Bowman, and he's going to have to look back at this and go, maybe this wasn't the right call. But, I don't know if it's necessarily a huge upgrade. I think it's probably a wash, to be honest with you. Maybe Jarry long-term is a little bit better than Stuart Skinner. There's some health questions. There's some injury concerns there. But I think the contract was a big part of this, because if Stuart Skinner plays well enough to, get another contract, he's probably going to be more expensive than Jarry, to be honest with you. So, I think they're probably going with a goalie they think they can rely on, and somebody who's cost controlled over the next couple seasons.
Well, it's interesting what you say about how maybe the original plan was to have Skinner and Jarry tandem in Edmonton. It's almost like a gift of the Magi situation a little bit, that you lose one and you get the other, and now you're really not any better or worse off necessarily. But I mean, Mike, what do you think of the trade in general? I mean, obviously these two guys, I think, have very similar pedigree, just in terms of they have had some really good shining moments in their careers, and then they've had some very painfully bad moments in their careers. They kind of tend to live on one end of the spectrum or the other. So where do you kind of see this unfolding for both of these goalies moving forward?
Well, the first thing I looked at this trade was that Kyle Dubas got 2 more pieces for their fire sale in March, because you got 2 pending unrestricted free agents in Skinner and Kulak. There'll be teams looking for defensive depth, so Kulak will probably be moved out, and so will Skinner, because Miroshov and Svilovs, and they have depth in goal. So I don't think Skinner is going to be there long term. As for the Jarry part of it, the 2 more years at $5.3 million for a goaltender who has had as questionable a career in terms of consistency as Skinner has. I mean, Skinner at least got the Oilers to a Stanley Cup final. I remember Jarry's playoff, I think it was 2021 against the Islanders, when he was a sieve, and he cost a team that I thought had a chance to go far, a first round exit. He at times has been really good, and maybe behind Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and a second chance, he can find his mojo. But I'm skeptical. I've never thought that the Edmonton Oilers defense was that great, and Skinner, sort of saved their bacon and Pickard at times last year. I don't know if Jarry can do that. So I'll be a very interested observer to see what the Oilers do in the postseason.
Well, sticking with the goalie theme to finish things off today. I want to touch on Ilya Sorokin. So since November 1st, Sorokin has the best save percentage, 931, and a 199 goals against average among goalies with 12 or more starts. So he's won 5 straight games as the Islanders have really been heating up as of late. They've won 6 of their last 7. So, Mike, do you think Sorokin has a shot to enter the Vezina Trophy conversation this year? And do you think that he and his performance can be enough to carry the Islanders back to the playoffs?
Well, he's been a Vezina nominee before, and I think he can be again. I think he's a very good goaltender. I think it more depended on the team in front of him. And over the last couple of years, the Islanders have suffered, a team that was once great defensively had large gaps in terms of their D. I mean, obviously the Matthew Schaefer addition on the blue line has helped them because he's a kid who carries the puck and pushes the offensive attack. You have to wonder whether he's going to hit the rookie wall as an 18-year-old in the NHL. The Olympic break might help them out and give him 3 weeks off if he doesn't get selected by Team Canada. But, they'll need Sorokin playing at this level to make the playoffs. I don't know if he can maintain 1.99 goals against and the save percentage that you quoted, but he's a very good goalie, so I wouldn't put it past him.
Jim, what are your thoughts on Sorokin? How much can he do for this Islanders team?
Well, I think he's the key for the Islanders. I mean, Matthew Schaefer is the face of that franchise moving forward, but I think Sorokin and net is the reason, like Michael said, that they will either be in or not be in the playoffs. I don't really remember, and I'll be honest, I haven't followed Sorokin that closely this season, but if I'm not mistaken, I think he struggled early in the season, right? So there was a lot of talk about whether or not he still had that kind of game left. So to turn around and have this sort of resurgence this season speaks to the strangeness of goaltending in the NHL, right? So the Vezina conversation, I think, is probably fairly wide open. And to say that he's still in contention or should be in contention for it, maybe it's too early to pick any obvious Vezina winner at this point, but why not, right? I mean, if Sorokin continues to play this way, there's no reason to exclude him from the conversation.
Certainly not. And it's definitely a conversation that is going to be ongoing throughout the rest of the season. And as we look to see what unfolds here in goal, whether it's for the Islanders, the Penguins, the Oilers, anywhere else, of course, you can read all about it over on the Hockey News. That is going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. And as a reminder, the Hockey News has been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today to listen to us talking some hockey here on the Wraparound. We do appreciate it. We will be back with an all-new episode later this week. For Michael Augello and Jim Parsons, I'm Emma Lingan. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you next time.